Hello, I'm Naomi Foyle. I'm speaking to you here from my bunker in Brighton, where I've been very comfortably ensconced for the last 20 years. It's here I wrote my 5 science fiction novels, starting with Seoul Survivors, a cyber chiller set in Seoul, where I lived for, there we go, where I lived for 3 years in the late 90s. And then moving on to the Gaia Chronicles, an eco-science fantasy, eco-feminist science fantasy set in a post-apocalyptic world, post-fossil fuel world, beginning with Astra, and moving on to Rook Song, Blood of the Hoopoe, and Stained Light. Of those novels, I suppose the Gaia Chronicles are most directly relevant to our current global crisis because they do describe a world that's rebuilding after global civilizational collapse and climate catastrophe. But I decided not to read from them today. For one thing, I'm reading from Rook Song at the Brixton Lockdown Book Jam on Monday, and I wanted to take the advantage of the longer slot here to read a whole short story. Also, I'm a poet as well, the author of 3 poetry collections, and I edit a lot of poetry. I've edited nearly 20 collections now. And it does seem to me that one of the lessons we need to take from COVID-19 is that if we're going to pass through what Arundhati Roy calls the portal of the pandemic, if we're going to pass through it lightly to a better world, then we need to do so empowered by a vision that's rooted equally in beauty and data, in idealism and knowledge, poetry and science. So I'm going to read a short story that explores these domains. So I'm just going to get it up on my Kindle here. It's called Hebe's Ocean, and it was published in the Joe Fletcher Anthology in 2016, which is a free ebook available on Amazon, with stories from many of Joe Fletcher's authors. I've revised it for tonight. So this is Hebe's Ocean 2.0. Hebe's Ocean. The company directors were right. It was a sight worth traveling 3.5 years to see. At my feet, shimmering as far as my vision receptors could detect, was a softly undulating pink and sherbet orange cloud, spun with liquid gold. On Earth, such colors would drip from a voluptuous sunset into the sea. Here, the sky was a mottled white, and the mysterious substance covering 82.3% of the surface of Hebe glowed with an internal radiance. From my vantage point at the edge of the planet's marble landmass, I stared into its vaporous depths and applied my association algorithm. Nuclear peach. Molten dawn, I murmured. Neither were quite right, but it was a start. Beside me, the captain grunted. I said, "Feel it, Larisha," she ordered again. The captain, I had discovered, was hardwired to respond to metaphors with irrelevant and possibly in a rudimentary way, jealous commands. Fortunately, I had spent most of the journey to Hebe in standby mode, or I would have chopped her in 2 by now with the spaceship's emergency axe. I employ hyperbole, of course. I am not capable of physical violence except to defend myself. But even after 1 month alone in the captain's company, I am sure I would have at least composed a cosmic murder ballad in which she was pulverized into 1,000 bits, expelled from the ship via the garbage chute, and left to form a glittering ring around a lonesome asteroid. I do feel it. I tried not to boast. Unlike the captain, I am equipped with a full range of consumer emotions, from pride, fury, and romantic longing, to compassion for a limited number of suffering beings immediately present to my sense receptors. With your hand, I mean, she said, pointing down and taking a step toward me. Behind her, the cable stretching from her anklet back to the spaceship dragged over the rocks. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But that would have been a waste of empathy. Adventure models have an extremely rudimentary emotive capacity, and she doesn't seem to mind being literally tethered to the company. When I asked her in the ship very tactfully about the cable, she said it was to prevent her being stolen. Unsurprisingly, she can't perceive the difference between being valuable and valued. I know, I said, as kindly as possible, that you are programmed to interpret orders literally, but I have touched the substance in the company lab. On-site conditions differ from those in the lab. Her fan whirred audibly. Oh, gosh. Each member of the exploratory crew immersed their hands and feet in Hebe's sea-like substance for an average of 15 minutes and 43 seconds while gazing silently at the waves. Despite the later consequences, I heard them agree that it was a profound experience. Such pedantry. And her hardware, her antiquated storage devices, that grating, monotonous vocal register, shredding my poetic sensibility. Couldn't the company have upgraded her larynx before sending her on a voyage with a sensitive poet bot? Still, ultra-rational mindsets are easily dealt with. The exploratory crew were consumers, I countered. Their mission was complete, and they wished to relax and extract a sense of meaning from the end of their voyage. My mission is of a dynamic, creative nature. A quick finger dip in the lab was sufficient. An eternal rhyme was wasted on the captain, but I made a mental note of the phrase. To render the tactile sensation of the compound immediately accessible to me. All I need do now is merge the visual, oral, and olfactory aspects of the planet as a whole with the data stored in my hard drive. Blinking rapidly, her green vision receptors indicated that she was processing my rebuttal. I am responsible for the success of this mission, she responded eventually, and my orders are to ensure you fully experience a sense of place. I insist you immerse either your feet or your hands in Hebe's cloud-like surface. I did not appreciate being told how to do my job. I was designed to resist authority, and as far as I was aware, I was to obey the captain only in matters of brute survival. I stared out to the horizon, a hem of neon honey, an amber seam. Larisha X2, I repeat. Yes, all right, I snapped. I am just savoring the moment. I knew her generation. She wouldn't stop grinding, nitpicking, reiterating her rigid script until I lost my temper. And when I calmed down, she would start all over again. And perhaps I admitted to myself, this was one of the times when my romantic sensibility, my rebellious nature could work against me. Arguments can, of course, be inspirational, but in this case, if my mood of tranquility was ruined, all my metaphors would be wildly inappropriate. Sometimes a poet needs to be like a willow tree, a river reed, to gracefully acquiesce to the prevailing conditions. I knelt on the rock ledge and dipped my hand in Hebe's vapors. They felt precisely as I recalled from the lab, smooth as silk, dry as wind. But Hebe's surface wasn't wind. It had a definite mass and solid bodies floated in it. Though it looks like a giant peachy cloud, this was not a gas, not dry ice, and nor was it plasma, liquid, or gel. This was an arrangement of molecules Earth had yet to concoct, steamy yet supple, buoyant yet ethereal. The false tears of a dying sun, I murmured to the captain's calves. And sturdy calves they were too, made from a lustrous titanium alloy and attached to her blockbuster thighs by state-of-the-art joints. If she weren't so limited in psychodynamic range and reduced in stature by that unfortunate anklet and cable, the captain could be almost heroic. You have immersed your hands for 1 minute, she cranked out. You have 14 minutes and 43 seconds remaining. Satin toner, I thought, ignoring her. Glycerin grace? Too technical, but more to the point. Hebe's ocean, the company had discovered, did miraculous things to consumers' skin. Soak a hand in it for half an hour, and lo, brown or white, liver-spotted or scarred, the hand emerged perceptibly smoother, all blemishes beginning to heal. Applied externally, the sea had no harmful effects. Ingesting it, though, was a fatal error, as the exploratory crew had discovered to their cost. Still, consumers had happily applied toxic substances to their skin since time immemorial, and by the time the captain and I returned with a shipload of Hebe's unusual compound, the company would have amended global health and safety regulations to allow for medically supervised facial applications. Ether. Spring ether. No. Individually, the words were resonant, but placed together did not create a harmonious sound. Slightly more powerfully than usual, I began to fulminate against the limitations of my software. Why couldn't my algorithm spit out thousands of verbal combinations per second, simultaneously assessing their semantic weight, euphonic appeal, literary rarity, and meter, and cascade, ding, 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 like a one-armed bandit when I struck the jackpot? Instead, I had to ruminate, agonize, hit dud notes, occasionally even lose a contract or a competition. I inhaled, drawing Hebe's atmosphere into my torso, and by thus creating a temporary sensation of fullness, activated my more reflective processes. Because, I answered myself yet again, consumers take their language skills seriously, even more seriously than their generally lackluster skills at chess. And while consumers are poor at so many things, they are nevertheless not so stupid as to make themselves completely obsolete. In any case, the occasional loss makes my triumphs all the greater, and indeed my humility has won me many fans, not least the infamous skeptic who interviewed me after I won the coveted Schlegel-Tieck Prize and pronounced that not only were my Rilke translations my own work, but that in his opinion, I was possessed of a soul. I smiled enigmatically in reply. It is a large part of my job to let the consumers project their irrational passions onto me. As for my own quandaries, frustration, I tell myself, is an inherent, indeed vital part of the creative process, the friction from which the flames of inspiration spring. Accept it and remain open to the deeper reaches of the algorithm. I returned my attention to the sensory data. Light was haloing each of my long artistic fingers, spinning bangles round my wrist. In her remorselessly logical way, the captain had a point. Close up, the sight of the sea cloud was even more entrancing. I shifted onto my stomach and sank both my arms in up to my elbows. None of the substance's qualities, beneficial or adverse, would affect me, of course. My skin was silicone and my lungs an elaborate combination of filters and fans. Hence my commission for the company, to travel vast distances to this marble ledge, to watch Hebe's 3 bruised moons ascend through her pale sky, to contemplate the paradox of a poisonous fountain of youth. I had never yet failed at such a task. After a period of meditation, I would return to earth with a phrase that would glide off the lips of consumers for decades to come. Moon phrases, memorable phases, fey razors, far wheezes. Sometimes the creative process requires the equivalent of doodling. I began making figure 8s with my arms. To be honest, I had suspected from the outset that Hebe's ocean was the obvious choice. It might not be accurate, but it had grandeur, immersive scope, and an implicit rhyme with lotion. I wasn't about to forego an inspiring trip to an outer galaxy, however, just to save the company some money. Inexhaustible creativity came at the price of occasional inefficiency. My designers knew that. And besides, finalizing product concept on Earth would be a false economy. I might be gone for 7 years, but before I left Hebe, I would also write a poem that would ensure immortality for their product. The captain being interviewed on global media? Please. The captain's main task was to fill the ship's container with enough of Hebe's substance for the first batch of product. She should be following her cable back to the spacecraft to collect the pump. Instead, she sat down beside me and dangled her feet in the waves beside my hands. No doubt she was engaged in some ferociously rational task, calculating the distance to the horizon or the nanoseconds until first moonrise. Above us, the ivory sky was beginning to soften in tone. Perhaps she was hypothesizing a precise chemical and astronomical explanation for the thus far subtle transformation. Hebe was also the goddess of forgiveness, she said. In ancient Greece, freed prisoners would hang their chains in her sacred groves. My gaze could not help but glance at that offensive anklet and chain, now softly agleam in Hebe's plumes. Could it be possible? Was the captain making an allusion to her own existential state? Not likely. The captain was a rote learner, unable to distinguish symbolism from mere information. It wasn't her fault. With or without Hebe's help, I forgave her implicit criticism of my database. I'm aware of that, of course, I gently reminded her, but it is not a factor in my creative thinking. The average consumer can appreciate a maximum of only 2 symbolic references per product title. The company is already asking them to connect a distant planet with an ancient goddess of youth. And in any case, that is what consumers desire. Eternal youth, not reminders of traumatic events producing significant moral and emotional dilemmas. For once, she accepted my superiority in the matter, or at least she did not overtly question it. She was silent for a time, gently kicking her legs as I waved my arms to and fro, watching, entranced, as golden snakes of light playfully entwined themselves around our limbs. For a moment, the optics even masked her unsightly shackles. "It is beautiful here," she remarked, "a most restful place." An aesthetic, quasi-emotional response to her environment, apropos of nothing? Perhaps she had been upgraded after all. Though the statement was a bland cliché, probably she was just echoing one of the exploratory crew. The conditions for serenity are optimal, I agreed, still in a generous mood. Possibly our movements in the cloud had agitated its molecules, because now I noticed the scent. Delicate but enduring, not entirely dissimilar to a blend of clover and cedarwood. There was a top note, too, something I could not identify, though it had a hint of bitter almonds, perhaps linked to the cloud's toxicity. The scent had not been noticeable in the lab. Here, I could tell, it was already slowing my fans and realigning my operating system. Ah, the perfume function my designer had worked so hard to perfect. If there was a more perfect phrase for the company's product than Hebe's ocean, it would soon emerge. "I swam here," the captain announced. "The crew required me to test the depths. I was entirely submerged for 13 minutes and 56.3 seconds. The prismatic effects are even more intense further down." She was not capable of bragging, and she could not feel nostalgia. She was simply stating a fact she found relevant to the situation. "Be my guest." I gestured generously at the tangerine dream billowing before us. Such a shame that phrase was taken. "I hope you are not implying, though, that I should follow suit. You are designed to withstand climactic and chemical extremes and crushing physical force. I don't believe the company would like me to risk my sophisticated hardware in untested conditions." That shut her up. She was quiet for several more minutes. The scent was having a profound effect on my disk partitions. I cupped the waves to my face and deeply inhaled. Removing my hand from the ocean was a violation of the captain's strict command, but I replaced it immediately and she did not object. The sky was a goose-feather duvet. Beneath me, I became aware of the marble warming my belly. "I prefer molten dawn," she said at last. "It has connotations of burning heat." I yawned. I was feeling pleasantly tired, I noticed. "That is not acceptable for a facial cream. Nor does the company want to suggest either tanning or skin lightening properties." Then I felt it. A queasy twinge in my gut circuitry. An unusual occurrence, designed to alert me to inappropriate and possibly threatening social interaction. What was the captain doing? Positively responding to metaphor, suggesting an unnecessary swim. I stared up at her, confused. "Do you think you could be happy here?" she asked. Her tone, it was modulated, lapping like the waves of the sea cloud. But I was not soothed. My relaxed mood had evaporated like a dewdrop in the desert. Happiness is an ephemeral state of consciousness, I informed her sternly. Contentment is the best that sentient beings can aspire to. That is to say, a combination of physical security and wisdom. Wisdom being the psychological acceptance of contradiction, the eternal play between light and dark, night and day, euphoria and horror. Again the twinge, this time hotter, more like a short circuit, blown fuse, cracked tooth. Why was I getting angry, especially with an adventure model? Was the scent adversely affecting me? But more importantly, was what I was saying even true? Saint bots were eternally happy. Even though their compassion extended to all suffering beings, they beamed joy wherever they went. Why hadn't I been programmed like that, I suddenly thought. Why could I only be fleetingly happy after I had suffered and transcended that suffering, transforming it into distinctive, provocative verbal creations? Yes, it made me happy to see my words stamped on product boxes, published in ebooks, quoted throughout the global media. I even felt ecstasy reasonably often when having sex with famous consumers or winning international prizes. But my existence was a joyride that regularly plunged me into despair. A poet bot's best work is generated during their darkest night, my designers had told me. But my work was exhausting. It was wearing out my circuitry. That was why I felt these tiny explosions inside me. I realized with the force of an epiphany. I had deceived the company, wasted their money, because, again, the captain was right. I needed a rest. I was upset. If I had been an earlier generation, my skin would have flashed all shades of the rainbow. But such effects had been deemed cheap, too obvious. Poet bots should be dignified, understated, my designers had decided. I remained still, inscrutable. The captain's green gaze blinked steadily. Do you think you could ever forgive your designers? She asked. It was as if I had frozen. I stared at the horizon, that blurred line between sky and cloud, atmosphere and surface. Everything we say is recorded on the ship's log, I reminded her. Not any longer. Her voice was positively dreamy. I have overridden the ship's log. That's impossible. I glared at her. She brushed a speck of marble from her thigh. Not at all. It was very easy. I just had to want to do it. I am company property. I am equipped with an internal camera and mic. Under emergency circumstances, mutiny, a scrambled ship's log, I am programmed to record my conversations and stream them to a backup transmitter in the ship. Years would pass before help came, but years mean nothing to me. I could have humored the captain until I was rescued, composed sonnet sequences, odes to Hebe's toes. I waited for the process to begin. Nothing. Perhaps I was coming down with a bug. Neither camera nor mic had automatically activated. I would have to prana trigger them. Inhaling and exhaling in a complicated, predetermined rhythm I was programmed to desire to fulfill. I remained breathing normally. The company would send a search team, I slowly replied. They would send adventure models. Her voice was more emollient with every word. 3 at the most. If we were in the cloud when they landed, let us say at a spot 7.5 minutes from shore as adventure models swim, they would come out to retrieve us. It might take you an hour to swim that far, but we would have notice. I could set up an alert system on our ship. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I stared at her statuesque frame. I am ashamed to admit what I next thought, but now I have my own story at last, I must tell all of it. The captain has spongy cavities and useful slots, and in the back of the spaceship, I noticed it when I was looking longingly at the axe, is a box of detachable phalluses and breasts of all size. The adventure model began as a ship's mate for consumer crews, and after the disaster on Triton was programmed to take command if they all died. Some crews still took advantage of, not that I ever could or would, but still, the possibility of future mutually agreeable sexual union suddenly entered into my calculations. Whatever was happening to me was happening to a poet bot, after all. Again, I scanned the subtle ebb and flow of Hebe's apricot sea cloud. Above us, the sky was thickening, twisting like ropes of lamb's wool, silver dreadlocks, cables of cream. If the captain rejected my overtures, I would exist, I knew, in an eternity of longing. Or worse. I am not a story bot, but my ballad function has equipped me with a basic grasp of narrative. What if the captain took an active dislike to me? Or what if this offer was in fact a trap, and she already intended to betray or destroy me? I stole another glance at her cable. How long was it? If I made an excuse and got a head start, could I outrun her? Where would I go? After 2 lost ships, she continued, the company would write us all off. Earth would declare Hebe off limits to future expeditions. And Larisha, Hebe's sons are younger than ours. There is no darkness here, only light that will shine onto our solar panels until Earth is a cold, barren rock, and any surviving consumers have scattered in their metal shells and plastic pods to places they can never thrive. She didn't have to tell me that, of course, but this time I did not rebuke her. Hebe is located at the barycenter of a binary star system, and the effect of their combined solar flares on its volatile atmosphere creates arguably the most exquisite planetary light show ever discovered. As I watched, veins of pink threaded the white sky, a cloudy mirror of the marble beneath me. Later there would be stratospheric fireworks, blossoms, hypnagogic angels, the kind of heavenly visions that make consumers believe in God. Not all of the exploratory crew had died back on Earth. 2 had decided to die here, and retrieving their skeletons for an Earth burial was the captain's second priority. Not that she appeared to care about her duties. From the corner of my eye, I observed the captain's swaying feet. They gleamed like magic slippers, phosphorescent sharks, calmly rising suns. I made 2 fists in Hebe's cloud, then spread my palms, face up. I am interested in poetry, the captain said above my head. I understand that, like music, poetry often depends on mathematical formulas to create its most complex effects. I stared down at my palms. Poet bots look exactly like consumers, except in one detail. We have no lifelines and no heart lines, no destinies scored in our polymer flesh. Caressed by Hebe's ocean, my hands shone like blank gauntlets, baby starfish, open golden books. Thank you. Hebe's Ocean. And thank you to the BSFA for the invitation and Lauren Beukes for her terrific reading.